3 fly halves, 1 number 10 jersey. And the man who has to decide is the same coach who spent years building a squad specifically so he never has to make an easy decision. That's the situation Rassie Erasmus is in right now, days out from facing the All Blacks at Ellis Park. And here's what makes it interesting. When Sir Steve Hansen was asked who starts at 10, he didn't give an answer. He gave a warning instead. So let's get into why this decision is bigger than it looks. This isn't just any test match either. It's the opening game of a 4-test series against New Zealand, the kind of series that gets talked about for years no matter which way it goes. Whatever happens at Ellis Park on Saturday sets the tone for everything that follows. Momentum matters in a series like this. So does confidence, which means the identity South Africa chooses to open with isn't just about winning one afternoon. It's about setting the terms for the next 3 tests as well. Handré Pollard, Sacha, Feinberg-Mngomezulu, and Manie Libbok are all in the frame for the same jersey. All 3 were part of a Springbok World Cup winning squad, though not all in the same playing role. None of them are placeholders. And that's exactly the problem Hansen was pointing to, because for years, that kind of depth at fly half simply didn't exist for South Africa. Now it does, and it's changing how people talk about this team. Each of these 3 players represents a completely different version of the Springboks. Start with Pollard. He's the control option. Reliable under pressure, comfortable managing territory, the kind of 10 you trust when a game is tight, and you need someone to make the right decision rather than the flashy one. He's been here before, in the biggest moments this sport has, and that experience doesn't disappear. Then there's Libbok. He offers something almost opposite. Tempo, unpredictability, a willingness to play what's in front of him instead of sticking to the plan. He's the player most likely to produce something no one saw coming, for better or worse, depending on the day. And then Feinberg-Mngomezulu. Physical, direct, capable of creating something out of nothing when the structure of a game starts to break down. He's not simply a backup version of the other 2. He's his own problem for defenses to solve. So naturally, everyone wants to know who starts. Reporters asked Hansen directly, and his answer is where this story actually starts to get interesting. He wouldn't say, not because he didn't have an opinion, but because he doesn't think there's a clean answer. According to Hansen, the choice depends entirely on what Rassie wants the team's identity to be. If South Africa want control and physicality early, Pollard makes sense. If they want tempo and unpredictability, Libbok or Feinberg-Mngomezulu make more sense. In other words, the fly half pick isn't really about who's the best player. It's about which version of the Springboks Rassie wants to show up. Hansen's phrase for the situation was that Erasmus has a hell of a good problem on his hands, which sounds like a compliment. And on the surface, it is one. And when you look at the options Erasmus has in front of him, it's easy to see why Hansen sees the situation as unusual. But then he said something that wasn't a compliment at all. He warned that too many good options can actually work against a coach. That when you've got this much depth to choose from, it's possible to overcomplicate things. To start looking for the clever answer instead of the obvious one. In Hansen's own words, you can get too bloody sneaky, and you can bugger yourself up. That's a genuine caution about the danger Erasmus now faces. One of the best coaches in the world, with almost too many good options in front of him. And it raises a real question. Could Rassie actually overthink this? Not because he lacks good options, but because he has too many of them. This is where the story usually stops for most people covering it. Who starts? Who's on the bench? Does Hansen think Rassie's overthinking it? But there's a layer underneath that, and it comes from someone with less hesitation than Hansen about naming names. Former Wallabies coach Ewen McKenzie was willing to make the call Hansen wouldn't. His prediction is Libbok starting, with Feinberg-Mngomezulu coming off the bench, and Pollard as the alternative option in reserve. He was clear that this is a prediction and not a certainty. His own words were that he could be completely wrong. But it's a specific, considered read from someone who understands selection pressure from the inside. Other respected voices in South African rugby have landed on similar predictions, favoring Libbok to start. But it's worth being honest here. These are informed opinions, not confirmed selections. Nobody outside the Springbok camp actually knows the team yet. And that uncertainty is exactly what New Zealand has to prepare for. Not a name, a range of possibilities. But here's where the story goes further than just predicting a starting 11, because Hansen didn't just talk about who starts. He talked about what could happen after that. According to Hansen, South Africa might not need to lock into one identity for the full 80 minutes. He described a scenario where the Springboks start with Pollard, use him to control the game physically early on, and then bring on a different fly half later in the match once the game opens up. Or, just as easily, run it the other way around. Start with tempo and finish with control. That's not us guessing at a strategy. That's Hansen's own description of what he believes South Africa is now capable of doing. And if you sit with that for a second, it changes the entire question being asked here. It's not really who starts at 10. It's who's actually finishing the game when it matters. Because a coach who can change his team's identity mid-match isn't just picking a starting fly half. He's potentially choosing two different versions of his own team and deciding when each one gets deployed. Hansen's read on why this is even possible comes down to what Erasmus has built over the past several years. His words were that Rassie's ability and bravery to roll the dice repeatedly with selection has created a genuine arsenal, not just backup options, but real alternatives that can each win a test match in a completely different way. That's a significant statement, coming from someone who understands exactly what it's like to prepare for the Springboks. So think about what this actually means for New Zealand heading into Ellis Park. They're not simply trying to figure out who wears the number 10 jersey. They're trying to prepare for a team that might show them one version of itself in the first half and a completely different version in the second. Power and control early, then tempo and chaos late. Or it could be reversed entirely. There's no way to know until the game is already underway. You can prepare for Pollard's kicking game. You can prepare for Libbok's flair. You can prepare for Feinberg-Mngomezulu's physicality. What you can't fully prepare for is not knowing which one you're getting, or whether you might end up facing two of them in the same 80 minutes. Normally, when you build a game plan for a test, you're preparing to counter one identity and adjusting slightly as the match goes. But if that identity can change based on a substitution rather than an injury, their preparation suddenly has to account for far more than one game plan. You're not just defending a team anymore. You're defending a decision Rassie hasn't made yet, and might not make until he's watching how the game is actually going. Which brings this back to Hansen's warning. Because all of this flexibility is a genuine strength. But it only works if Rassie doesn't fall into the trap Hansen described, trying to be too clever, over-engineering a plan when a simpler one might do the job just as well. The same depth that gives South Africa this weapon is the same depth that could tempt a coach into second-guessing himself right when clarity matters most. That's the tension sitting underneath this entire selection. On one side, what a hell of a good problem to have. On the other, you can bugger yourself up. Both of those things came out of the same conversation, about the same squad, from the same coach. And we won't know which side of that equation wins out until Erasmus names his team, and, ultimately, until we see how he uses those options on the field. So here's the real question heading into Saturday. It's not just who starts at fly half for South Africa. It's whether Rassie Erasmus treats this depth as the advantage Hansen believes it can be, or the trap Hansen warned it might become. Pollard for control, Libbok for tempo, Feinberg-Mngomezulu for unpredictability. Or maybe, if Hansen's right, two of them across 80 minutes. What would you do if you were in Rassie's position? Let me know in the comments, and subscribe to Libbok News for more, because once that team sheet drops, we're going to find out exactly what kind of Springbok side is walking out at Ellis Park.